Now that we have our class, SmartUrl constructor, which accepts the base URL, saves it internally, and then in our public method, we render the URL back out. We want to add the ability to add parameters. For instance, $ID equals 300, ampersand, status equals print, etc. And the way we do that is we make another public method, which is going to add a parameter. We'll call it public function add parameter. What do we need? A parameter name and a parameter value. So we're going to have to save this or these parameters internally. Let's make another private variable. Private means that it's not able to be read from the outside of the object, hence internal variable, and it's going to be an array. So we'll call it parameters. We'll define it as an array with good programming style here, and this is an empty string, good programming style so you can see what it is. And when we add a parameter, what do we want to do with it? We want to simply add it internally to the array, which is an easy thing to do. This, by the way, refers to the object itself. So this parameter, this parameters add an item to an array equals parameters parameter name. That's the key of the array equals parameter value. And so we are now able to go up here and say SmartUrl. What are the public methods? Oh, now add parameter is there. Good. What do we need? A parameter name and value. Name is ID and value is 123. So what happens when we execute this? Let's look. We don't see anything, but what happened internally is we now have one item in this array. Let's add another one. SmartUrl, add parameter, call it status print. And if we would run that, it would add 2 items to this internal array. So now what we want to do is when we render this URL, we want to also check the parameters and add them to the end of the URL. And we do that by going here and saying parameters equals the internal parameters. I always make the variable simpler here, just get the internal value, just so that code is clearer. And then we want to add the parameters to the base URL. And we do that by doing this, add the parameters for each. This is my template. Dink. So parameters. So we have, if there are any parameters, then go through all the parameters, and now we're going to add them. And if there is at least one parameter, then we need to add the question mark at the end of the URL, and then we just add one parameter after another. So let's label everything, build it, and parameter. This is a key value array, of course. Parameter key is in there, and parameter value. If you remember, when we added the parameters, we put a key in here and a value here. Better name would be key here. Key value is standard. So key value, and here we have then parameter key equals parameter value. So let's see what that gets us. Oh, pretty nice. It added both of the parameters onto the end of the URL, but what we see here is we need a ampersand. It got the question mark, of course, but we need an ampersand before each parameter that is not the first one. So let's do that logic. To be able to know if it's not the first one, we need to define an index here, and then say here, we have to increment the index here, increment index, add 1 to it each time. And then here we need to add the ampersand if it's not the first time. So add ampersand if not first time. So if index is greater than or equal to 1, then add the ampersand. Super. And we see that we can add as many as we want. Information equals yes. It just adds those on. Now the very important thing here is that if you take off the first one, the question mark stays in the right spot and the ampersand stays in the right spot. So that shows flexible code, robust code, scalable code, which is what we expect from object-oriented programming. So let's go back through everything we did in this film. We have our base URL that we send to the constructor that is added to a private variable, an internal variable that's only accessible inside the object. Then we add a parameter with the key ID and the value 123 here. It comes here and it just gets added to the internal array. So now it has one item, same thing happens with status and print. Now it has two items, same thing happens with information and yes. Now it has three items and then we render it. What happens when we render? We start with a blank string. We get the base URL, which is just internal. We get the base parameters, which has three items. This is an array. And we add to our outgoing string the base URL. Okay, and now we need to add all the parameters. If there are any parameters, then we do something. What do? First, we add a question mark because we know there's at least one. Index is 0. We have to count so that we know when to add the ampersands. Then we go through the array and get out the key and the value. And the first time, index is 0, so we don't put in ampersand, otherwise we would have a question mark ampersand, which isn't right. It adds the key and the value with an equal sign in between, adds 1 to the index, we go through again. Now index is 1, so we get an ampersand, and we add the next parameter, and so on and so on and so on until it's finished, and then we return it, and that gets output. Just so you can see that our code functions in every case. If we take all the parameters out, there will be no question marks and no ampersands.